Welcome, everyone. My name's Chris, like I said, and today is day 5,330 that Boswell's been here and been in business. Welcome, Curtis Chin. He will be in conversation with Z Zacharia, who will do a little bit more introducifying here in a moment. But I want to thank our co-host for the day, OCA, Organization of Chinese Americans, Wisconsin.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Chris, for the wonderful introduction. First and foremost, I wanted to thank Boswell for hosting this wonderful event. So I want to make sure I don't miss anything, so please allow me to read a little bit. So my name is Z Zacharia, and I'm representing OCA Wisconsin. And on behalf of OCA Wisconsin, I am thrilled to be here with you to welcome Curtis Chin, author of Everything I Learned in a Chinese Restaurant. Founded in 1973 as the Organization of Chinese Americans, OCA's mission is to embrace the hopes and dreams of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders by advancing social, political, and economic well-being of the community. There are over 50 OCA chapters across the country. OCA Wisconsin has our roots in the Chinese Civic Club, where several of the founding members were Chinese restaurant owners here in Milwaukee. We work locally to promote OCA's mission in Wisconsin, including but not limited to advocating for an Asian American curriculum in our public schools, hosting various cultural events, providing merit scholarships, and sponsoring speaker and author series just like this one. Today, we are very privileged to have writer and filmmaker Curtis Chin with us. I met Curtis at OCA's National Convention last July. And we are very fortunate and very grateful that Curtis is able to squeeze Milwaukee in his tour. He is on if I'm counting correctly, 34 cities in 8 weeks. Plus, if you Google his name, yeah, it's amazing. And when I picked him up this morning, he only has one carry-on bag. Like, wow. I thought I packed light. And if you Google his name, you'll see that he's done various media interviews, including NPR and CBS Saturday Morning. So encourage you to look it up. Very insightful. Curtis is from Detroit and first thought about becoming a writer after the murder of Vincent Chin, who is a family friend. After graduating from University of Michigan, which last night's game, as a Purdue fan, my favorite 3 words are always next year. After graduating from University of Michigan, Curtis co-founded the Asian American Writers Workshop. He wrote for major television networks and media outlets before transitioning to social justice documentaries such as Vincent Who and Dear Corky. His work and passion include elevating the AAPI and LGBTQ communities. Thank you very much for your work, Curtis, and dedication in these areas. His awards and accolades are so numerous that it'll probably fill in the rest of the hour. So suffice to say, we are very honored to have Curtis here with us today.
Great. Thank you for that warm introduction. Thank you to Boswell Books. Thank you to OCA, also to the Asian American Foundation for helping to bring me out here to promote my first book, Everything I Learned in a Chinese Restaurant. As the title implies, I grew up in a Chinese restaurant, and I like to think not just any Chinese restaurant, but the Chinese restaurant in Detroit. And the way I have this barometer in my head is I like to ask people, guess how many egg rolls we sold in the 60 years that we owned this restaurant? This is like from 1940 to the year 2000. And these are handmade, even the skin and the plum sauce. Any math people here? Or if you've read the book, you can't guess. We sold over 10 million egg rolls. I mean, that's how popular they were. So this is really, really popular restaurant in Detroit. So despite the fact that the 80s were a really difficult time period for my hometown, I mean, you had the struggling auto industry, but you also had crack cocaine, you had AIDS. I knew 5 people murdered by the time I was 18 years old. My parents were able to raise us, give us the skills and the tools and the things that we needed to sort of succeed and have a good life. And so in some ways, this book is my memoir, but it's also a thank you to my parents. And it's a thank you to my hometown for giving me these opportunities. And so I'm going to read a very short bit to begin with, just to sort of set up what the book is about. And then later on, I'll read a little longer passage, if that's okay. So the book is divided into 3 sections of 8 stories each. For people that know Chinese superstition, that's 888, which is good luck. It's broken down to elementary, middle school, high school, and then college. The prologue actually sets up my family's story of how we ended up in the Midwest, because I don't think you can know a person's story unless you know their family's history, at least a little bit. And so I try to set that up with the beginning. So I'll just start. Welcome to Chung's. Is this for here to go? Armed with a smile and a red waiter's jacket with a perpetual plum sauce stain. That's how my dad greeted any new face who entered the lobby of our popular Chinese restaurant in Detroit. Interestingly, my great-great-grandpa Gong Li Chin had faced the same question in the late 1800s as he stood cold and alone on a rickety dock in Guangzhou, China, trying to decide his future and that of his young impoverished family. For here to go. For here to go. As I got older, it was a question I asked myself. Starting in our restaurant's long and open back kitchen, where my family made some of our most popular items, including the tangiest barbecue pork and best smelling almond cookies, my mom taught me my first lessons. Before diving into math, English, and geography, she began with a little American history, tales of elders and ancestors, our family as prologue. And so the rest of the prologue continues on, establishing how my family ended up in the Midwest. And I think that's important because a lot of times when you read about Chinese American or Asian American history, it's all centered on California or New York or Hawaii. And I want to say, hey, we've been in the center part of the country, for decades too. So it starts off with my great-great-grandfather, Gong Li Chin, who actually moved from Canton, China to Canton, Ohio, before realizing there weren't actually Chinese people there, and then moving up north to Detroit. It goes through, he first started to get a job, in the auto industry, couldn't get it. So he did the hand laundry thing, eventually saved up enough money to open a laundry and then a grocery store. And in 1940, he opened our restaurant called Chung's Cantonese Cuisine. And it was a really, really popular place, that served everybody in the city. And, that's how my family was raised. And the prologue continues up until the year 1967, which was a pivotal time period, not just for my family, but for the city of Detroit. We had these things called the Detroit riots or the Detroit Rebellion. There was a lot of racial strife going on in the country at that time, and Detroit got particularly hit hard. And so for 5 days straight, we had to close the restaurant for the first time ever. And during those 5 days, my parents somehow managed to have sex. And 9 months later, I was born as their riot baby. And so people often ask me, it's like, why do you talk about race so much? Because I say, like, well, without that incident, I probably wouldn't be here. So it's kind of in my DNA to talk about it. And so the book follows this journey of this fundamental question of for here to go, right? Like, do I stay in this family business, this wonderful restaurant where my family is, and also, I get all the free food I want, or do I go off and be my own person? I mean, the city is literally burning down around me, and I'm struggling with my own sexuality, trying to come out of the closet. And so that is the fundamental question of the book. And I think it's something that's relatable to most people, right? When do you decide, you're ready to move on, and what are you leaving behind? So that's the book. And, I look forward to reading a chapter further down, but we can just jump into questions now if you want. Great.
All right. Yes, clearly, I think that's a great summary, because while you said it in such few sentences, there's a lot of storylines in the book that helps you go towards and bring you to where you are today. So one of the storylines that was interesting to me is the interplay of your parents. Your dad, Big Al, who's Asian American, your mom, who's an immigrant. Myself, I am an immigrant. I moved here before high school. My wife moved after high school for college, and of course, our sons are born here. And I can see the differences in cultural perception and the varying degrees of assimilation with my own family. So I wanted to explore your thoughts on those. So how have your parents' diverse cultural backgrounds influenced your upbringing and shaped your perspective for life? And specifically, how has it impacted your sense of identity and belonging?
Yeah, so my parents had a mixed marriage like you. I mean, so my dad was born in America, but my mom is an immigrant. I don't want to oversimplify it in terms of saying like, oh, well, my dad was more freewheeling, more open-minded. My mom was more conservative. But the one thing I will say, which was an interesting twist, is that like everybody in my family could cook, right? Including my parents. But my dad, who was born in America, made the best Chinese food. And my mom, who was born in China, made the best American food, like lasagna and meatloaf and stuff like that. So I think that in some ways, as I was also trying to navigate this space between like, traditional Chinese culture and, American culture, I think they were probably also going through that process as well. It's something I think that we don't think about, right? We think that like, oh, as kids, we're struggling with these things, but our parents also, to some degree, are also dealing with these same issues. So.
How about, from a cultural assimilation and a cultural preservation, given your parents' unique blends, what are your perspectives on this? And, I think this kind of reminds me on a passage where you talk about the whole Amy Tan story. in
Oh,
terms of,
okay.
the preservation and the assimilation of the journey.
Yeah. So a lot of the book isn't just about my own story. I think it's also about my family's story because they're also linked together, I think. And one of the big characters in the book is my mom. I mean, a lot of people have said that it's actually my mom's memoir as much as it is my memoir, which is maybe true. Just to give you a little backdrop about herself and the time period of which I'm going to read the story is that my mom had a really difficult life. She was born in China. She'd been left behind by her parents when they escaped the communists, and then finally got reunited. I mean, after some horrendous stuff, she got reunited with them, in Hong Kong, but then eventually had this arranged marriage to this stranger from Detroit, a city where I say in the book is like that she knew that they made great cars and even better music, but that was all that she knew about Detroit. And so I'd love to read this story. But I think the backdrop that I also have to tell you to set it up is that I grew up in Detroit in the 80s. And as a gay person, I think one of the biggest challenges was obviously AIDS. I literally did not think I would live past the age of 30 because everything that you read about gay people was that they would be dead. But then also growing up in a city like Detroit, where you literally saw people getting murdered. I mean, I didn't see the murders, but you know what I mean? Like people you knew were being murdered. I mean, I did not understand the idea of being in college for 4 more years, right? I felt like I wanted to go off and live my own life. But my mom, who didn't have very many opportunities in life, like she had to drop out of high school to get married, really felt that education was the key for us. She really wanted us to go off and have a good life. And to her, that's, meant going to college. So I'd like to read this story. It's from the 3rd section of the book. And so the chapters in the book is sort of listed like a Chinese menu, like all these different categories. And so they may not make sense, but if you think of it like a Chinese menu, they do. So it's chapter M7. So, okay, let me see. Sorry about that. Okay, here it is. Okay, chapter M7. So I went off to the University of Michigan. I wasn't sure what I was going to study. And eventually I stumbled upon creative writing classes because I was working during the day and going to school at night. And they seemed like pretty easy A's, basically. So it's like, oh, you just have to write a few haikus and you could graduate. So that's why I studied it. But it turned out to be something I enjoyed. And so I got into the creative writing program, which only accepted 20 students. And so it was a competitive program. So this is story M7. Being a creative writing major made me the literary expert at Chung's. That was inevitable as my dad asked every customer, "Have you met our number 3? He's the writer in the family." Every time he mentioned my program, the number of students accepted got smaller and smaller. At some point, I expected him to say I was the only one on campus even allowed to own a pen. One week, one of our waiters was out sick. My younger siblings were busy with their weekend activities, so I was the one called in to help. I jumped at the chance to have some home-cooked meals for a few days. I was running around the dining room, refreshing our customers' silver teapots, when a white middle-aged woman reached into her oversized bag and pulled out a colorful hardcover. "Have you read this book? It's so good." The Joy Luck Club, the recently released novel that featured a bunch of old sassy Chinese ladies who like to eat, gossip, and play mahjong, could easily have been set in our back kitchen. You guys all know the book, right? Hopefully. Every time I came in to help at the restaurant, another diner, usually older and female, cited the most memorable characters, lines, and scenes. They all wanted to know if I was working on something similar. I was writing poetry, but they didn't care. To them, all writers were the same. They would squeal, "You could be the next Amy Tan." My mom turned out to be the biggest pusher. She rarely had a book in her hand, But the success of the Joy Luck Club convinced her that her life was a bestseller too. She followed me around the dining room, dropping stories from her childhood, the same ones I'd heard growing up, but now she recounted them as if she was auditioning for her own books on tape. One night, after seeing how our waiters sometimes pooled their tips together, my mom shared an oldie. When the communists marched south, they targeted my family. My uncles and grandpa were rich in America, so the Red Guard called us traitors. My stubborn grandma didn't want to leave her big home, so when my parents escaped to Hong Kong, they left me behind to keep her company. The communists hated me and my pawpaw. When I was 4, they made me watch as they forced my grandma to climb the old banyan tree in our courtyard. Then they pushed her off into a pile of broken glass. For a visual, my mom rubbed her knees. Another time, standing at the water station, she launched into her own nautical tale. When I was 5, my uncle in America paid $25,000 in renminbi, a king's ransom in people's money, to a local fisherman to ferry our remaining family out of China. After a long ride tucked under the planks of his fishy fishing boat, we came up for air. But we weren't in Hong Kong. The traitor turned us into the authorities. In jail, I had to sing Communist Party songs to earn extra rice for me and my grandma. Another chapter came as we stood beneath a painting of the Chinese countryside. When my pawpaw and I were freed from jail, we found that the officials had given away our home to peasants. We were forced to live several villages away in a dirt hut with 3 other families. Whenever we went out for a pail of water, my grandma had to bend low to keep her head below the soldiers. Once again, she gave me a demonstration, this time bowing her head. Granted, my mom's epic saga interested me. Who wouldn't be intrigued by tales of prison cells, guns, and stolen ransoms? Even the parts about her mundane life in Hong Kong after she was reunited with her parents and siblings were amusing. But these were her stories, not mine. She had to tell them, not me. I was in school to find my own voice. I sat and listened, but that was as far as it would go. Toward the end of the summer, as I was at the back table sipping my red pop, stockpiling poems for the upcoming semester, my mom sat down. Before I could say anything, she started talking. I was a top student in Hong Kong. When Pepsi came to town, they held a big contest for students to draw a picture of their own school. Mine was the best at Sacred Heart. I won 6 cases. There were so many bottles, I had to give them to the nuns. I threw down my Parker pen, the one I'd treated myself to after getting into the program. Yes, and they all started burping all day. It was so funny. Ha ha. You've told me that story over and over, and I don't even like Pepsi. I like Coke. My mom's shoulders shriveled. The shine faded from her rosy cheeks. You don't want to hear my story? I tensed up. I do, but I'm behind on my own stuff. Between working at Drake's, the Journal, and Saving the World, my schedule was packed. On top of that, my workshops in the fall were advanced. Still insecure about my place in the program, I put pressure on myself to create more interesting writing by staying up late and scribbling in my notebook every detail of my life. But no matter how hard I tried, working harder could not produce a better poem. My mom lifted herself off her seat. The glint in her eyes orphaned me. Her 42 years of life flashed before my eyes. She'd gone from Guangzhou to Hong Kong to Detroit and spent the past 2 decades raising her 6 children in a hostile foreign land. She tried to prove her life had worth, that it hadn't gone unnoticed, and here I was, the ungrateful son, writing it off. Her lips quivered in a soft murmur. I hastily picked up my pen, backtracking. Go ahead, Mom. I'll write it down this time. My mom bowed her head as if I were one of the soldiers holding a gun to her temple, ordering her to sing. No, you go on. You do your own thing. I reached out my hand, but by then she had disappeared through the black swinging door, leaving only the rattling from the kitchen, the clanging walks and rumbling dishwasher. I sat there upset at myself for being so inconsiderate. Everything I had done in the past 3 years had been for her, but it seemed as though I had just failed the final test. My education wasn't just to help me get a better life. It was for my whole family. We were a team. We were the 8 immortals. How could I let them down? I needed to make things right, but I knew that, like most disappointments in our house, apologies were never spoken. Only deeds would bring about reconciliation. So that's it.
Thank you, Curtis. So, I mean, in many ways, by writing this memoir, you are bringing her stories to life as well, compared to your reflection at that time. You felt like you had little time to entertain her thoughts and stories.
Yeah, I had an academic say that to me. He's like, like, because academics are really smart people. And so he was like, yeah, you say that you're writing out off your mom, but you're actually writing her in. He said like it's very meta like that. So
Yeah,
yeah,
very
I
good.
guess so. So my mom won after all. She got her stories out there.
Asian moms tend to do that, right?
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
how does your dad's how has your dad's Asian American heritage and your mom's immigrant background influenced your view of multiculturalism and diversity? I know in your book you talked about Detroit being a city of black and white and trying to find a place as a brown person, but how do you layer in the additional complexity of the family dynamics of your parents?
Well, I think that I was very lucky because my parents were both very open-minded people. I think growing up in Detroit and having to navigate that space, particularly my dad, because he had grown up, he was born and raised there. He was very keenly aware of the racial politics. But, one of the first lessons that my parents taught me, and, this is how I answer, because oftentimes people ask me, given the title of your book, what did your family teach you in that Chinese restaurant? And I like to share this story about how, like, when you're a kid, most parents tell their kids not to talk to strangers, but my parents actually gave me the exact opposite advice. They said, talk to strangers. And who they were talking about were the people sitting in our dining room. Because again, my mom didn't have a chance to graduate high school. My dad went to community college for a couple of semesters before he had to go back and work in the family business. But they knew that we had this whole dining room of people who had all these different experiences, right? And so whenever my dad met somebody who had a cool job or just seemed exceptionally happy, he'd call all 6 of us kids to run over there and like barrage these people with questions of like, well, what do you do for a living? How did you get your job? How much money do you make? And so it just always taught us to be open-minded, to not be afraid of talking to people who are different, not be afraid of asking questions and even asking for help. And so I think that's just something that my parents always tried to do with the restaurant. They welcomed everybody. And so that's an attitude that I feel like I tried to carry with me.
I tell you, you're very good at asking questions. On the whole car ride over here, he was asking me questions after question. I wanted to ask him questions, but I couldn't.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's okay.
That's the filmmaker in me.
Yeah. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Another storyline that was interesting to me is about your relationship with your grandmother.
Yeah.
Partly because I can identify with some of the things that you
Oh,
were
really?
talking about. Yeah.
Did she call you useless too?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah. So Asian grandmothers, right?
I have a story to share about that, but
yeah.
go ahead.
Go ahead if you'd like to share a story.
Oh.
With it. Yeah.
So that is the opening line in the book is Mo Young, which means useless. Right? That's what my grandmother would call me. And so she's kind of like the villain in the book. And so this sort of comes up with an interesting question. People ask, like, is it tough to write about your family? And I just felt like I tried to be as honest as possible. And so, I did have a difficult relationship with her. But what was really interesting is that, so I've been doing these readings, like even as early as February, I did a bunch of readings before the book came out. And I was in Austin, Texas, doing a reading, and the hosts had gotten to the restaurant early. So they said, oh, can you meet us early? I said, okay, fine. So I called the Uber, went downstairs on the street to wait. And there's an old Chinese lady just standing on the corner there. And she turns around, she sees my sweatshirt, and it says, Detroit versus everybody. And so she asks me, oh, are you from Detroit? And I'm like, oh, yeah, I am. And we get to talking. And it turns out that her mom was best friends with my grandmother. And so she starts talking about my grandmother, saying, oh, she was the nicest person ever. Like, she always had candy in her pocket. Like, she taught me how to drink American coffee. And I was like, yeah, that's not the grandma I knew. But she just really was so insistent, saying, no, you've got her wrong. She really is a good person. And I was like, I wasn't going to try to convince her, because it'd be really sad if my grandma didn't have some people that loved her. I mean, like, someone should love her. It just wasn't me, right? And so I quickly got in the car as it left. And like a couple of days later, I realized that was probably my grandmother sending an emissary from the grave telling me that, like, I didn't write her correctly. But so I shared that story at a reading in Minneapolis like a couple months ago, and the audience was mostly older Asian women, and they all immediately started defending my grandmother, saying like, "Oh my God, no, this is how we raise our kids. This is exactly, you know." So I'm not surprised to hear that you said that your grandmother did that too.
Yeah, very
But
similar.
I said, no, that's not it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so without going into the details in the book,
Mm.
your relationship with grandmother was definitely complex and full of tension. Now, within the context of, traditional, let's call it traditional Asian values of emphasizing respect for elders, can you share your perception of how you would balance those family dynamics and cultural expectations?
Well, that was my mom's mantra. My mom had this mantra that it was basically work hard, obey your elders, and be silent, right? And so I think I do two of the three in life. So you guys have to guess which two. But so it was a challenge, and particularly with my grandmother and then other people in the household. I think like at the end of the day, I just tried to be respectful to everybody in there. So I don't, so I feel like creating three-dimensional characters is the best way to sort of show that. In terms of the tension that it had, I don't know if I really thought of things in such a binary way, because not only was my dad Asian American, but my siblings, we were all, and I just felt Asian American. I don't feel like I was caught between two worlds necessarily. I did feel complete, like I had this experience, which was a hybrid of both. And I don't know if I necessarily felt like this need to choose per se, right?
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Sure.
Yeah.
Um,
Like much the way like your kids, right? I don't know if they may not see the binary as much as you do.
yeah, I think that's a very good observation.
Yeah.
So yeah, we had some. For me, with my son, definitely we had a recent event that
Yeah.
really highlighted it. Where I'm looking at him, I'm like, wow, that's not the way I would have, behaved.
Yeah,
But
because you experience it knowing the difference of how you were raised in
Correct.
Malaysia versus your experience here in the United States. But for us, who've been here multiple generations, it's like it's all blended in already.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some coloring to it a little bit, but it's still, more intact. It's less.
Yeah, that's an
split like
excellent
that.
point. Yeah,
Yeah.
actually, and you've answered the next question is really the impact on younger generations' perception of tradition and family obligations. So, you're good at getting ahead.
Oh, okay. No, you sent me the questions in advance.
Yeah. So equally as important, along with being Asian American is, about being gay in the book, particularly in the 1980s. You touched upon that. I wanted to maybe explore, about talking about being gay and coming out, because to you, that's one of the things that you said too, is the most important thing is to come out to yourself more than coming out to other people. And that experience, let's say, quote unquote, back then compared to now, where back then, I think, regardless if you're gay or straight, finding out about sex and sexuality was full of misinformation. I can think of the things I heard when I was 13. And it was just crazy stuff compared to now, where everything is so abundantly available when it comes to sex and sexuality. So, if you compared that journey that you went through compared to what you may be seeing in terms of what other people just in general seeing with the information available, do you think that has positively or negatively helped, gay people in terms of understanding and accepting their own identities, or has it been, created more anxiety and confusion and negative self-perception?
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, I am an old person, so like maybe I'm a little bit more traditional, old school in some of these things. But yeah, I do get weirded out about how things have changed. I mean, because I grew up in a time like in the 80s where being gay, because these days they have this phrase, things get better, right? But back then, we really did not think that. We didn't have that. I try to think back, like as a young gay person growing up there, what kind of hope did I have? And I really think that I didn't really have any hope, right? There really was no hope. There was nothing to grasp onto, especially in those early days of AIDS. So I think it is quite different. And it is. The expansion is also difficult for even older gay people like me, because like I talked to people my generation and we had the term queer, right, which really made one clear thing to us, right, which was a gay, lesbian, bi, and maybe transgender. But now you have all these additional letters that are added to it, and we're all confused by it. It's like, well, queer meant something back then. So I don't know, how to analyze that as an older gay person. I mean, every generation looks at these things differently. I am glad that younger people feel more emboldened or like more open to talk about these things, and I am glad that they do have hope, right? Like that there is a difference. I did worry about like the book being relatable to young people because it's such a specific time period in gay and lesbian history, that AIDS era. But I think that the more I think about it, the more I feel like, okay, maybe it is a good thing for them because we are getting a certain amount of pushback now. And for a lot of these young people, they have never lived in a world where there wasn't such a thing as marriage equality, right? Like, or issues of don't ask, don't tell, and things like that all seem like, relics from the past. So it's kind of nice that they can sort of see how our community, has been able to overcome some of these things. And so some of the challenges that they may be facing now, maybe seen in that context, may not be as overwhelming, maybe.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I do think it's great that you do write about those things because just like, how you weaved in the Vincent Chin case into your story, shining a light on it helps everyone understand and be more appreciative of where we're at today.
Yeah, and how people can change, right? And opinions change. So one of the things, for people who haven't read the book, this was the 80s during the height of the Reagan Revolution, right? And I was actually a young Republican back then. I was the Asian Alex P. Keaton, and I had some really conservative positions back then, right? But as you get older and you hear things and you adapt and you go to the University of Michigan where you get indoctrinated by all these liberal professors, then you start to open your mind up to different ideas, right? And so that is part of the journey too, is this ability, to listen. I think that's surprisingly, it's what a lot of people have talked about or praised the book for, is that, I don't present myself as this perfect person growing up, and that I am someone who does grow by changing, by listening, and being open to hearing different sides of arguments. And so that's something that we don't do as much this day in this country, right? We get locked into these really set ideas of things, and we're, that's not very healthy for our country. And so maybe by presenting a character that actually does allow themselves to listen, maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah, great. So at this point, we're going to transition to Q&A. So I'm going to kick it off. And
Okay.
These questions I did not send to you in advance.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So these are what I call rapid fire questions. It's just going to be, as quickly as you can think of the answer. We like to know the real Curtis Chin. Given that we're talking about restaurants, it's going to be food themed.
Okay.
So you ready for this?
Okay.
All right. Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Rice or noodles?
Oh.
Don't tell me I stumped you already.
Can I say both? Like noodles. I have to say noodles because noodles are good luck. It's for long life. Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. Okay. Sweet, salty, or sour?
I would say savory, but you didn't give that as an option, did you?
Okay.
Okay.
That'll be good.
Okay.
Spicy level: none, mild, medium, or hot?
A 2. And I'm married to a Korean, which makes it really hard.
All right.
Yeah.
What is the most exotic thing you've eaten?
Oh, probably whale in Norway, even though you're not supposed to, but we did it anyway. Yeah. Whale. Yeah.
That's a new one. Yeah. Best food city ever?
Detroit.
Of course.
Yeah.
Favorite comfort food?
We have this dish called almond boneless chicken in Detroit. And so I'm actually doing a piece for Kevin Pang is going to be here, but he hosts a show called America's Test Kitchen. And so I'm producing an episode of their podcast, which looks at this very unique Detroit dish called almond boneless chicken. But yeah, you have to buy the book to read about it.
Excellent. Yeah. What is something you're great at cooking?
Oh, I'm not.
Okay.
That's one of the jokes of in the book, is that like everybody in my family could cook, like except for me. And so whenever everybody gathered to cook, I was the one banished to the dining room to go set the table. And so that is one of the life lessons that I learned, was that, I really wanted to be a good cook because I felt like that's where everybody was, right? And that was all the energy in the kitchen. But then I realized that like in life and with families and businesses, we all have our place, right? And it may not be the place that you think is that you want to be, that you find yourself in the place that you need to be, and you eventually grow into it and you really like it, and you become really good at it. And so I felt like, that was something that, I really struggled with as a kid, because I just wanted to cook like everybody else, but I couldn't. So I don't cook.
No
Sorry.
cooking.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes, I did. Oh, yes, you read the book. Yes. Yes. Well, if you try for like 22 years, eventually you get one thing right. Yeah. So,
All right.
yeah. Okay, so that's the other lesson. Don't give up, right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
true.
Okay. That's the other lesson.
All right.
So many life lessons.
Have you ever pretended to like someone's cooking? Be honest.
Yeah. No, my grandmother was a good cook. That was the one thing about her. So if I had to say one nice thing about her, she was a really good cook. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. I would say my husband's cooking. He had this weird habit of putting soy sauce in everything. Like even making Italian spaghetti pasta, he would put soy sauce in that. Like, don't do that.
That reminds me of Joy Luck Club.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's soy sauce, everything.
Oh, yeah.
All right, last question. If you could have a dinner party with 3 celebrities, living or dead, who would it be and what would be on the menu?
Celebrities? Oh God. God, these are hard questions. Who would you ask?
Yeah, it is a hard question.
uh
But luckily, it's not about me. It's about
okay.
you.
I would invite Pete Buttigieg. He's a politician that I'm intrigued by. I feel like I should ask somebody for food. I don't know. Oh, I would say like Harry Shum Jr. just because I want to meet him. I don't know. I don't know who the third person would be. Yeah, sorry. But what would be on the menu? Yeah, probably Chinese food, noodles, I guess. Yeah,
Of course.
yeah.
All right. Questions for Curtis. Go ahead.
Do you want to pick? Okay.
So, can you talk a little bit about assimilation?
Mm.
As a Chinese American, when you run the Chinese restaurant in town, you're not really all.
Yeah.
And especially Detroit at that time when there was such an anti-Asian sentiment because of the auto. Did you feel vulnerable? Did you feel that you were out there? Talk a little bit about assimilation.
Well, that's why I was a Republican because that was like hiding, right? Because one of the accusations against Asians is that we're not very loyal to America. We have to, split loyalties, and so I didn't want to be accused of that. So I was going to out-patriot the white people. I was going to be more American. I was going to wave the flag, and so that was sort of like being in the closet about being Asian, right? And so I think that's how I thought it was best to fit in, because by that time we were at a school that was like 98% white, and it was a Republican district. And so that was my way of fitting in. But in terms of the other stories that people talk about, like, oh, having weird food at lunch and stuff like that, we didn't go through that because my dad, we were already eating PB&J and stuff like that. So we never brought Asian food in. But you always realize how you're different in strange ways, like, because when you grow up, you're proud of who you are, but then there'll be these small moments where you'll be like, oh, well, maybe I have to question, like, because of the way people respond to it. And this story isn't in the book, but I like to talk about, like, when we moved to the white suburb, one day the teacher was like, oh, it was like something about work day or something, like, your parents work, right? Bring something in from where your parents work to say what it's like. And all these other kids, because they all worked in the car industry, they all bought these really nice 4-color brochures about the cars that their parents worked on. I brought a Chinese menu, right? And the way those kids reacted to that was sort of like, oh, why did you bring this? That it made it me that was one of those moments where I felt bad about, like, my family owned a Chinese restaurant, and I'd never felt that way before. I was always proud of it. So in that ways, that was the first time I felt like, oh, maybe it's not so cool to own a Chinese restaurant. So maybe in that way, class was the first time that I thought about class in that way. Like, oh, we're working class. We're not, you know what I mean? We're not like these people. So yeah, I don't know if that helps. Yeah, okay.
Let me think.
Sure.
So,
marriage be mixed marriage, so they're both of 100% Chinese ancestors.
Yeah. Oh, but mixed in the sense of immigration status. You know, one was American born. He spent his life cruising Woodward, you know, as a kid. The other one was born in China, you know, with much more traditional, even though her family was also in America, right? But because of immigration laws, the women were always oftentimes, you know, left in China, and the men came to work here in the States. And so both sides of my family have been here since the 1800s. But on my dad's side, because they owned property and they were merchants, they could get around what was called the Chinese Exclusion Act. Because if you were a merchant, you could actually sponsor your kids and your wives to come. And so my dad's family was able to do that. My mom's side wasn't, because they continued to be, you know, labor working class, so they could only send the money back. Mm-hmm.
Growing up. So from the growing up in Detroit until you graduated high school, what did you learn in schools about being Asian?
Well, I mean, obviously I'm trying to fit in. I mean, I'm also dealing with the sexuality thing. I think one of the lessons I talk about in the book is this idea of racism, you know, and how to deal with that. Because you know, my mom was really strict, right? Like, she didn't like us going out and hang out with other kids. And so it was always just study, study, study. But then finally, when you get to high school, she realized that we needed to have friends in order to get to college, because you need to join clubs and stuff like that. So she loosened up a little bit. And so there is a story in the book how, like, I go to my friend's house to hang out for the first time. And it was great. It was a lot of fun. But the next day at school, my friend just makes this offhanded comment of like, oh, you know, my parents said you were the first minority we've ever had at our house. And I'm like, should I thank them, or what should I do? I don't know what to say, you know? And so like, I was like really confused for the rest of the day, how to, you know, make sense of this. And so in the end, I realized that, you know, there's a difference between intent and impact. Like, his parents probably, well, first I should say, like, all racism is dumb, but there's some that's mean. And if it's not mean and it's just dumb, then I think I have to just sort of like accept it a little bit more, or be a little more compassionate about it, because it's a difference between intent and impact, in the sense that his parents probably didn't intend to hurt my feelings or to make me feel different, but that still doesn't diminish that's the impact that it had on me, right? I still felt that way, but that's probably because, you know, you as Asian Americans or as other people of color, it's these small microaggressions that happen, these small little things that just accumulate. And what I say in the book is sort of like death by 1,000 cuts, right? That's exactly what it feels like. And so, yes, on the surface, it's a small comment. It's not a big deal. But in the bigger scheme of my life, it just opens up these cans of worms of like all these other things that have happened in the past. But at the same time, it's like learning how to somehow identify that, okay, if they're not meaning to be hurtful, at least if I could tell them, or at least say it, you know, then maybe they won't do it again, right? But then not, you know what I mean, not totally write them off, because that wouldn't be helpful either. So it's navigating the space, right, of how you deal with these things, which I think is really challenging. So
you got a question over here?
I'm sorry, what?
How did your family feel?
That's in book 2. Sorry. I don't come out to them in this book. I mean, so yeah. But that's the point that I make in it, is that at the end of the day, because I did come out to friends, I came out to coworkers, I came out to my in school, and at the end of the day, there really is one major person that you have to come out to, and that's yourself. Because as gay people, we know this is something that happens all the time, right? Throughout our whole life, no matter how old we are, there will always be some component of coming out. So whether I came out to my family in this book, it doesn't really matter, right? As long as I'm equipped to be able to handle that and make that decision of when is the right time. I think that's the more critical thing about like a coming out memoir, right? Versus in the past, the way other memoirs that I read, it seemed like they treated that as the pivotal moment, right? You build up to coming out to this person as if that is the end of the story. And that's not really, I don't think that's how life is. So, yeah.
Growing up in Motown,
Oh, can I read another? Do you have another? Okay. So, this is one of the other stories that I like to read. And it's actually paired with it. This will be really short. Shoot, I should have marked these pages. Okay. A6. Sorry. In Detroit, the Motown sound was everywhere, and in my mind, the one and only Diana Ross reigned supreme. Her sweet, youthful voice, combined with her radiant smile, served as an inspiration to me. In addition to sharing a Chinese zodiac sign, the year of the monkey, we were from the same area. The international superstar had grown up blocks from our restaurant in the Brewster Douglas housing projects, the largest government-subsidized housing in Michigan. Though Ross's label, Motown Records, had abandoned the city a decade ago, I used to fantasize that one day the singer would make a splashy return and we'd share a dinner for two in our front booth. When I reached 7th grade, Diana's hit, I'm Coming Out, came bursting onto the airwaves. You guys all know that song, right? Because I'm not singing it. I was 12, and the term coming out was new to me. I'd never heard it before. I thought it was cool, but I didn't think it had anything to do with being gay or lesbian. The lyrics were more universal. The song championed personal freedom and independence. I could definitely relate, as there were 4 adults in our house, each with 1,000 heavenly mandates. Whenever the song came on the radio, I cranked up the volume and channeled my inner diva. Unfortunately, one morning before we opened, as I sang along in the dining room, I had an unexpected audience. Derek, one of our younger waiters. A member of the old Kung Fu Club, the John Travolta wannabe had a ripped chest that he'd like to show off by leaving a button or two undone. As I shook my booty and stretched my lips, pink chopstick in hand, he snuck up behind me, and when I turned, he swished his hand from side to side. His limp wrist may not have been a motion in American Sign Language, but the gesture was so well known that even a Chinese waiter from Hong Kong understood what it meant. It meant fag. Thankfully, no one else was in the room, and Derek had the memory of a goldfish. He never brought up the dancing again, but his accusation put fear in me. No one in my family ever said anything anti-gay, not even grandma, who could spout some pretty offensive things about race and gender, but no one said anything positive about being gay either. That left a big question mark in my mind. How would they react if it turned out to be true that I was like that? Back in the early 1980s, the perception of gays and lesbians outside the major cities, pre-AIDS and pre-Pride parades, was much harsher, more toxic than it is today. There were no positive role models in music, television, or film. Homosexuals were lumped in with drug users, alcoholics, and pedophiles. There was no guarantee that things would get better. But despite my resistance and denial and the many cold showers I took, I couldn't ignore my growing attraction to boys. It happened too often to be a fluke or a one-off. Until I could figure out what this all meant, I needed space to sort through it. To buy myself time, I tried my best to blend in. After the close call with Derek, I paid more attention to the way my body moved in the world, how I walked and talked, ate and laughed. I started to notice how others were perceiving me too. While I didn't think I had any effeminate habits, I still tried to butch things up. No more silly dancing to the Queen of Motown. I needed to find a strong, respectable male role model, one who is preferably straight. So the rest of that story actually goes into Bruce Lee. So it's a Diana Ross Bruce Lee story.
I think a couple more questions.
Oh. Oh. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah. I know because my mom made them and she told me the number. Yeah, because they were really good egg rolls, but they're really hearty. So we had a lot of people just ordering that as the dish, right? And it also came with every combo plate. And then people in Detroit would like literally buy bags of it to take home to the suburbs, right? Because they all left at around 6 or 7 at night, so they'd come in and they'd buy these giant bags. So that's how. Yeah.
I think we've got time for one more question.
I don't know if she's read it. I mean, I know she has it, but she did come to the reading, and I did share that other story, the one that I read earlier, and she seems to like it. I mean, because I think that's all she really wanted, right? Was just to have her story she wanted people to know what a difficult life she's had, because I feel like she's one of those women who just from that era who just never got to shine or be in the spotlight, and she's always lived herself through her kids. And so I feel like that's why I do like to read that story the most, is because I'm sharing my mom's story as much as I'm sharing my story with her. And so I think she does appreciate that, you know, and she does verbalize it. She's not one of these Asian moms who can't say, I'm proud of you. She does say that, which is nice. So.
Thank you, Curtis. So as I mentioned, I met Curtis in the OCA National Convention early this summer. As you can see, I immediately went up to him and said, "Hey, Curtis, would you entertain coming up to Milwaukee?" And you can see why I was so thrilled. And he said, yes, he could make it here. So thank you very much,
Yeah,
Curtis.
I skipped an event in Chicago to come up to Milwaukee. So as mentioned, I am on this big tour right now. So if you want, I'm actually, I do go down to Chicago and then I head off to Michigan, Ohio, but I'm doing like maybe, I think I'm doing more closer to 40 cities, but because there's a lot of events that aren't necessarily published, but please check it out at curtisfromdetroit.com. The book's been getting a lot of press. If you didn't notice, CBS Saturday Morning News did a segment on it. All things considered, Washington Post today just had the front cover of their book section. There's a nice profile. NBC News is following me to Detroit this upcoming week to film a segment. So it's been getting a lot of great press. And so it'd be great to get more people to come out and know about the book. So thank you.
And you'll be signing books.
And I'll be signing books.
So
Thank you, everybody.
thank you.
Mhm.